this story was going to be about multiculturalism, and as it turns out, when I think of multiculturalism, I think of Rob Ford, which is weird, but I learned something very important and poignant and memorable about multiculturalism from Rob Ford. I grew up in Montreal. That's where I'm from, and I came from a background where we were part of the brown community, you could say. I mean, there were few enough of us that we could weave. My family could weave interchangeably between sort of the brown community, Indian community, Pakistani community, Muslim community. There weren't that many of us, and that's the kind of environment we grew up in. And my parents came from Pakistan to New Brunswick, where I was born, before I went to Montreal. And in New Brunswick, I mean, if my dad saw a guy with a tan, he was like, there's one of us, there's one of us. And that's really how it was. I mean, Fijian, African, Lebanese, Trinidadian, wherever you were from, you were one of us. Because it was the 70s and it was New Brunswick, so that just made sense. If you've grown up in Brampton or Mississauga in the 90s, this is a foreign concept to you, for sure, where you find your own everywhere. But in New Brunswick, you know, my parents, and it wasn't just, you know, there's this old sort of story about when two black guys in a small town pass each other, they give each other a nod, a knowing nod. It was that, except it was any background, any ethnic background. And it wasn't just a nod. It was like, how are you? What is your name? Where are you guys from? And something about the beauty of that shared ethnic experience was so powerful that they would build friendships just in those meetings, which is really the stuff of fantasies now as I think about it. But that's where my parents came from. And they loved it. And in Montreal still, we weren't a huge ethnic community. And I think that was good as well. You know, and the discrimination that I faced in Montreal was never because of my color. When it was discrimination that I faced by French people, it was never based on color. It was always based on language. Les estis d'anglo, always anglo. That was always the issue, which is great in a way. And I know what the stereotype is of Quebecers, bigots and racists, and this is a very negative stereotype, but there's a way out of that racism. You just learn a language and then the racism is gone. That's exciting. And I did that. I learned French. I was in French immersion. And then from French people, I would hear them telling me, these goddamn Anglophones, and I'd be like, oh, okay, I guess you don't understand what I'm all about. But I'll pretend to nod my head and also be racist just to belong. But I thought it was a wonderful thing to be able to do that. My father, I watched the opposite thing in my own house because I guess he faced some discrimination which he took great offense to, and he refused to learn French on purpose. And he was a linguist. He was an English teacher. He could tell you the past subjunctive of any French verb, but he wouldn't speak a word of French on purpose. He was like, I'm not going to give them the satisfaction. I'm like, I feel like you could maybe get some satisfaction out of being understood in the province you live in, but all right, that's the way you want to go with it. So that was Montreal for me. And then as I got to meet more Anglophones, I got to experience what racism is really about. Unfortunately, some people knew Montreal, when we go from the South Shore, which was more French, to the West Island, that's when it would be, you know, my friend and I would go to the skating rink and guys would come up to the side of the rink and be like, hey, Packy, you better not think you're skating here today. And I'd be like, what? Where am I? What weird, magical, racist land have I been transported into? I live in Montreal, just on the South Shore. What's their problem? And then when I would come to Ontario, that was, I mean, for the sake of time, I'll just have to shrink the racist experiences down to just a couple. But there were, like London, Ontario, there was a few. Yeah, there you go. There's the reaction. Ah. I was walking with a white friend at the end of the night. I had gone with McGill University. I had gone to a debating conference on top of the world. Probably lost my debate. Still on top of the world. I was a very bad debater. But I remember my friend and I, Craig McGuigan. You can't get whiter than Craig McGuigan. And we were walking with slushies in our hand down the street at like 2 in the morning. And a car just drove by and somebody yelled out, Go back where you came from, Akbar, and I was just like, we just stopped, and Craig just sank and was like, I'm so sorry that just happened. I'm so sorry that just happened. And then I remember when I was in Cambridge, Ontario. My cousin lives in Cambridge. And I remember the three of us, the three Pakistani cousins, walking at night, leaving a house party, and not driving. So we were just walking across Cambridge, and this Trans Am drove by, and some guy yelled out, "Immigrants and faggots!" And I don't know if anybody's a Guns N' Roses fan, but those are lyrics from a Guns N' Roses song. And like my first instinct, this is how much I was into rock and roll and metal and music at that time. I was like, they make no sense to me. And then I was like, shit, what am I doing? What am I doing? He didn't want to connect with me about Guns N' Roses. He was calling me, I'm either an immigrant or a faggot, and he was trying to, oh God. And there's numerous stories like that, but it was always with smaller white towns or white people in French Montreal. And that's why. And so when I moved here in 2010, I was very surprised to hear about Rob Ford. I didn't know about Rob Ford before I got here. You don't usually research your next town and look into who your next civic leader is going to be. I don't know. Maybe some people do. I had other goals. I came here to build my career and my brand and marry my wife, and she had 2 daughters who are my daughters now. I had other concerns. And then as soon as I got here and I moved to Etobicoke, I started hearing about Rob Ford. And the first thing I heard about Rob Ford was it wasn't a funny story, but I laughed at it anyway. It was my wife telling me, like, do you know who Rob Ford is, right? And I said yes, just so I didn't sound dumb. And she was like, he's campaigning here. And so I got the fact that he's campaigning to be mayor. I got that. And my wife was taking my daughter for piano in an apartment building. And so Rob Ford had given out a few flyers to a few white people on the main floor of the apartment building. Him and Doug came into the elevator, stood beside my wife, and then just went back like this. They didn't give her a flyer. And then at a certain floor, somebody came in, and then he gave them a flyer, and my wife was just like, it's such a bullshit. I don't understand why he didn't give me a flyer. And the reason I laughed is because my wife is 36 but looks like she's 17. And I was like, he probably thought you were one of the kids going for a piano lesson. I remember just sort of dismissing it at the time. She didn't care for that, obviously. But I didn't realize what I was dealing with. I didn't really know who Rob Ford was. And then over time, I started learning about who Rob Ford was. There's a place called Shoey's. There's a bar in Etobicoke, Martin Grove. Real blue-collar bar. We were doing a comedy show there. And I was new to this city, and when you're new to a city, nobody cares about you. They put you first. They're like, go, suffer, die. We're not going to warm up the room for you. Go and, sink or swim, buddy. So the host, Jay, is about to go on to host the show, and then he's going to bring me on quickly. And as he's going on, he goes, by the way, he's on his way to stage, and he just goes, by the way, this is Ford country, just to let you know. And I was like, wait, what do I do with that information? And he's like, whatever you want. And he got on stage, and I was like, what does that mean? And I was like, just sort of looking around, and I'm like, well, they look like normal people. I don't know, everything seems fine here. And the more I learned about Rob Ford, the more confused I got. Because it became clear that Rob Ford was racist, at the very least, homophobic, misogynist. There's a list, but we'll focus on the racist because this is a multicultural, storytelling night. And I was like, how did that happen? That didn't make any sense to me. And then after we left this one home in Etobicoke, we moved to the armpit of Rob Ford. We moved right in the heart of where Rob Ford's constituency is. There is a picture on 15 Windsor Drive. There's a picture of Rob Ford with 3 other guys, and he's blitzed out of his mind, and 2 of those guys are dead. You know that picture? That's 500 meters from our house. Exactly 5. We've looked it up on Google Earth. It's exactly 500 meters. That's how close we are to that house. And then we're 100 meters from Don Bosco Secondary School, where he coached football. That we're just behind the field where the football players play. So we're really in Rob Ford country, and I just couldn't understand how in a city as diverse as Toronto, one of the top diverse cities in this country, Rob Ford could have been elected, and it was looking like he was going to be elected again. And I made it kind of a mission to be like, I got to figure this out. What am I missing out on? Why is he getting the votes? And originally, on the surface, I said, oh, I get it. He appeals to white people, and that's it. And white people come out in droves to vote for this man. But then I went to the Ford Nation barbecue. And I took my wife and my kids, and she was really unhappy that she's pushing the stroller up the grass. And she's like, why are we here? And I was like, look, I'm a comedian. I'm going to get some material here. I am going to get some material here. I didn't get any material. I just got more confusion. If you've ever been, has anybody ever been to the Ford Nation barbecue? No, I did not expect anyone to have gone to the Ford Nation barbecue. Even when I was going, I'm like, I really don't know why I'm going here. But I was like, something will come out of this. It's so close to our home. And I get to the backyard, and there's like lineups, so it's like 100 people in line for a beer, 150 in line for a hot dog. I was like, I don't need either of those things that badly. I'm not going to wait in line. And I just start looking around. I just start studying the crowd. And I see ethnic people. Not a lot, maybe 20% of that backyard. But I see Asian people, I see West Indians, I see Indians, and I just baffled. I was like, are these guys also here to write material? Are these also comedians? That's the only that's the only possible answer. I remember just being confused by all of it. And then I went home and I literally studied Rob Ford, because I was like, if he's a known racist, why are people voting for this guy, including immigrants? And I looked it up, and immigrants do vote for them. And immigrants of different different degrees of wealth, different social classes of immigrants will vote for Rob Ford. And then it occurred to me that there's something that immigrants care about that is more than racism, and that is saving money. And that is an old, hacky stereotype, but that's the truest thing I've ever got to know about immigrants, that our number one concern is saving money. And if there's one thing Rob Ford did, was promise to save people money. And so racism be damned. Hey, he's going to save us $60 on this vehicle tax. He's going to save us. And I was just baffled. I was just baffled by the whole thing. For me, racism is, that's the top. That's the guy from Chick-fil-A did not support marriage of anything other than that typical, that traditional Christian marriage of a man and a woman. And I was like, I'll never eat that guy's chicken again. I thought everybody's on board with that kind of thing. Apparently not. Chick-fil-A's at the top of its game again. Number 1 in fast food. Number 7, Subway, even after Jared. Like, people don't care about these things. People just care about saving money. And I was baffled, but that is one of the most important things that I've learned from Rob Ford. And how do you apply that in your own life? What's the takeaway? I don't know. I don't know your own personal lives, but let's say you're going to create a union of some kind. You're going to shack up with somebody, or you're going to marry somebody who's from a different ethnic background that your parents don't support. Well, the trick to getting your new in-laws love, you save them a few bucks, and they will look past the fact that you are of an ethnic background that they don't appreciate. I'm guaranteeing you that, right? And if your future in-laws don't like you, start looking for ways to save them money. And all of a sudden, it's going to be like, you know what? Not so bad, that weird kid from another culture. If that's, I always try to have a takeaway after any story, and that's it. Try to save ethnic people some money. Thank you so much, everybody.